So can you explain why it's so important to set boundaries?
Oh, yeah, I'm smiling. Yeah, it's a good topic, you know. And again, we could do a whole interview. In fact, I could probably write a whole book, which I probably should, about boundaries. Um, you know, when we're little, we have no power. Everybody else is big and they can do whatever they want to us. Our parents can do whatever they want to us, our older siblings, older neighbors, teachers, you know, preachers, priests, pastors, you know, whoever. If they're bigger than us, they can do whatever they want. And as children, we can't stop it. So what happens is we grow up to be adults, most of us not having any awareness that we can create boundaries that say, no, stop, don't do that, or I'm going to do this, or I want to prove myself. That's not in our repertoire of life skills because who teaches little children to set boundaries? You know, I didn't learn any. I just learned, you know, just hide or, you know, try to manage your situation. So I didn't learn about boundaries until I was in my early 30s on my second marriage, and I already had a PhD in marriage and family therapy, and nobody had ever talked about boundaries in all my education. And when I mentioned, you know, when I started into therapy, you know, about 3 years into my second marriage, I luckily found some good therapists, and one of them I went to work with, our very first session, she taught me about boundaries. I don't know if she did that for everybody in their first session or she could just tell I had none. And she just put a little line on the ground and said, here, stand on that side of the line. I'm going to stand on the other. And she said, I'm going to walk towards you. I'm going to come across your line. I'm going to put my hands on your shoulder. I'm going to start to push you backwards. And she said, when you begin to feel uncomfortable, stop me. And so I started out, you know, about 2 feet behind my line. You know, that's good, nice guy. You know, I don't even know what a boundary is. You know, and I don't want to be too close to my boundaries because I might upset somebody and they might, you know, be mad at me if, you know. So I'm back about 2 feet from the line, and she comes, you know, walks across the line, puts her hands on my shoulder, and starts pushing backwards. And I start kind of backpedaling a little bit, and I said, okay, stop. And she kept pushing, and I said, stop. And I'm about to the wall behind me. And finally, I kind of planted my feet a little bit and even lifted my hands up and just stopped her, right? She said, good. And I said, look where you are. You know, my back was like, you know, she'd pushed me back about 5, 6 feet, and my back was almost to the wall. And they said, let's talk about boundaries. And that was such a graphic learning lesson for me because, like most people, but especially most nice guys, I had no concept of boundaries. I didn't know I could put a line on the ground and say, that's my line, that's me, that's my personal space. And I didn't know I could decide who came into that space and how long they could stay and what they could do while they're in there. And I didn't know I could ask them to leave now, or I could remove myself, or I could say stop. And this is so essential because here's the irony. Boundaries allow people to get close to us because if we do not have personal boundaries, if we can't say who can come in and what they can do and how long they can stay, if we don't have that kind of personal boundaries, we have to either avoid people in general, right? Just be a distance or an avoider, and there's a lot of adults like that, or we have to put up walls where we just don't let anybody get close to us. And then, but you know, we're social animals. We need the connection and closeness. So the boundaries allow people to get close to us. And an example I give is that, you know, if you get out and, you know, drive onto a freeway, the freeway has lots of boundary markers. You know, you'll see there's an on ramp. So you say, okay, that's for, and it'll say enter only, do not, and people can't exit. It's an entrance. You'll see yield signs. You'll see speed limit signs. You'll see little markers between the lanes. You know, if you get off the highway, you'll see stop signs. You'll see stop lights. You'll see speed limit signs. You'll see crosswalk signs. All of those are boundary markers. They allow a lot of vehicles to go at high rates of speeds in close proximity and not keep crashing into each other and not have constant gridlock. That's what boundaries do for us. They allow us to coexist with lots of people in close proximity and not keep crashing into each other, not just physically, but in emotional ways as well. So a big part of growing up is learning how to set boundaries. And it can be challenging to start because most of us don't even know where to start. Where can I make my boundaries? Can I say no? Can I say stop? Can I say I want? Can I say if you do that again, you know, I will leave, you know, or I'm going to get off the phone now. Call me back when you're in a better mood. You know, or I'm going to take a walk. We'll talk later. We don't. It's challenging to start doing that, and our fear is that people will react negatively to our boundaries, and sometimes they do. Many of us have been raised by what I call professional boundary invaders. I started setting boundaries, especially with my mother. When I was in my early 30s, doing my own personal work, because she just kept violating boundaries all the time. She's very codependent, and the boundary was every time we talked, she wanted to complain about my father. Well, she'd been doing that since I was a little kid, and finally I said, "Mom, stop. He's my dad. You and I can talk about anything. If you got complaints about dad, either take it to dad or take it to your therapist." And she just kept pushing that boundary. She'd get mad at me. She'd cry. Every time we talked, she would just start complaining about my father, and it's like she amped up, And I just kept saying, "Mom," and she said, "Well, you're trying to control me." And I said, "No, I'm not. We can talk about anything. Just I'm not going to talk about dad." And then she started getting passive aggressive with me, and finally I had to stop seeing my mother and my father. I didn't see them for 15 years, right? Because they just, especially my mother, just kept violating every boundary that I would set. And after close to 15 years, I reached out to my dad and sent him a note of appreciation. And he and I, kind of redeveloped a connection and saw each other maybe once or twice a year because that's about all he was capable of. And then when he died of a stroke about 11 years ago, my mother and I had about 2 weeks together where we just hashed out everything that had gone on. And about 11 years ago, and I think we have a very close boundaried relationship now. I think we both had to grow some and get some understanding, but the boundaries are what allow us to be close. Like I said, I just spent 2 weeks with my mother. She had a stroke a year and a half ago, lives alone. And when I go spend time with her, I think both of us really enjoy that time because now we have a boundaried, supportive relationship, not that invasive relationship that I'd had most of my life that I thought was normal. So again, boundaries allow us to get close. They can be challenging to learn to start setting them. Most people will appreciate them. Like if somebody steps on your toe, if you just say, "Hey man, you're on my toe," most people go, "Oh, I am sorry. I didn't realize I stepped on your toe." Now, other people, you say, "Hey, man, you're on my toe," and they'll say, "Get over it, wah, 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 man up." Those kind of people you don't want to hang out with if you set the boundaries and they continue to push through them. But again, this is one of those things that it helps to have help doing it because when people start out setting boundaries, they either have no clue how to do it and they're either so passive about it, nobody even knows a boundary's been set, or they go to the extreme and become what I call kamikaze boundary setters, where we're using a chainsaw when a fly swatter would do. But that's okay. Sometimes we got to go far the other extreme to realize, oh, okay, I didn't need quite that much. I could have just said, "Hey, you're on my toe." I didn't need to punch the person in the nose for stepping on my toe. Sometimes it's just that learning process. But boundaries are essential, and they're liberating. They allow us to have a good life and have good people come close to us.
Totally, and I've noticed that in like my own relationships where I used to think like, hey, if I'll just let they stepped over my boundary, if I just let this time slide, they won't do it again, or they'll like me more. But I realized that wasn't the case. Like in one instance, this girl I was dating, she would always be on her phone while we were on a date, like even while we're out eating. And I would tell her like, hey, like if it's important, like if it's like your mom or family, like an emergency like that, I understand. She's like, "Oh no, it's just my friends talking." I'm like, "Well, hey, can you like just use that minimal amount of resistance? Like, hey, can you not be on your phone while we're hanging out?" She's like, "Oh, okay, I'll stop." And that made me like her more. And then like she respected that decision. And then we were both happier by setting a boundary instead of just letting her continue to cross that line. And that was it's counterintuitive, but it works. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Reader's Journey. You can learn more about what's covered in today's podcast in the show notes below. If you enjoyed this podcast, the best way you can support it is by subscribing and leaving a positive review. If you're looking for reading tips or book recommendations, head over to alexandbooks.com. If you want to join my reading journey, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter by searching for Alex and Books. That's all for now. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you soon. Read on, everyone.